Radio Voice Italia. Philadelphia.
Class is now in session. Christopher Columbus University is on air from Philadelphia and broadcasting worldwide from within the shadow of Marconi Plaza. Radio Voice Italia is proud to present a recurring segment with civil rights author, professional researcher, and renowned Christopher Columbus expert, Robert Felix Petrone, Esquire.
Buongiorno tutti, and welcome to Radio Voice Italia's Christopher Columbus University, where we teach you the truth about the greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries, Christopher Columbus, and update you on the international efforts to preserve Christopher Columbus's legacy. I'm your host, Il Professore, Robert Petrone. Today on our Christopher Columbus University segment, I'm going to do something that I won't be doing in the future, which is talk about myself. And the reason I don't do that, first of all, I don't like to do that in particular, but mainly it's because that's not really why you're tuning in. You're not tuning in to hear about me, you're tuning in to hear about Christopher Columbus. And you will in the episodes to come, believe me. We're going to talk about Christopher Columbus in all aspects of his life. Primarily, this series is going to debunk the slander you've undoubtedly heard about Christopher Columbus in recent years. Columbus as a racist, rapist, maimer, murderer, slave owner, slave trader, grifter, and genocide heir. All of those things are lies. I'm going to tell you why they're lies in the episodes to come, and we're going to go into great depth into Columbus as a man, as a Catholic hero, as a civil rights activist, as a super dad, as a super navigator, as a good governor. We're going to debunk Howard Zinn. We've got a lot of great episodes coming up, a lot of great sessions or classes, if you will. But I thought if I'm going to do that, you, the listening audience, might want to know who the heck I am and how I am in any way an authority on this subject and why you should believe anything I say. So in order to do that, I'm going to tell you who I am. So I'm Robert Petrone, Esquire, I guess. I'm an attorney. I was born in Philadelphia. My parents, about half a century ago, a little more than a half a century ago. My parents were born in Philadelphia. All of my grandparents were born in Philadelphia, except for my paternal grandmother. She was born in Camden. But all 8 of my great-grandparents came from Italy and settled in South Philadelphia, including the parents of my Camden grandmother. And they, the Petrones, the people from whom my surname comes, they came from Cosenza, and the other great-grandparents in my family came from all over the Mezzogiorno, from Muro Lucano, from Venafro, from Campobasso, but they all settled in South Philadelphia, where I was born. And I moved to Southwest Philadelphia at about the age of 4, where I was mainly raised. I was educated in North Philadelphia. I went to Temple University. I earned a degree in criminal justice at Temple. I also studied sociology. I worked as a criminologist. That was my first career, was as a criminologist. I did that for many years. I then went to law school. I graduated law school. I continued to work as a criminologist through law school. But when I graduated law school, I moved to New York City. It was the first time I lived outside of Philadelphia. And I was a prosecutor in New York City in the Bronx office. And my first experience with the slander against Christopher Columbus took place in those years that I was living in New York City. I was living in Manhattan, working in the Bronx. It was the early to mid 1990s. And I was sitting on the subway reading some local periodical. I don't remember exactly which one it was. One of those free periodicals you can find in New York. It might have been the Village Voice. If it wasn't the Village Voice, it was something similar. Some countercultural periodical, if you will. So I was sitting on the subway reading this countercultural periodical, and I came across an article in it about Christopher Columbus as a genocide heir, as a rapist and murderer and slave owner and slave trader. And this was the first I had ever heard anything like this. And I raised an eyebrow at this. I took it with a grain of salt because it was one of these radical countercultural rags, if you will. But I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. Well, I thought, look, those were primitive times. It was the cusp of the end of the Middle Ages, the cusp of the Age of Enlightenment. And I thought, perhaps there's some truth to this. Maybe they're just overstating it a little, but all right, people were primitive in those days, so perhaps there's some truth to it. And I moved on and didn't think about it again. A couple of years later, maybe a year later, maybe a little less than a year later, I don't remember. I was in downtown Manhattan, maybe it was the Village or Chelsea or Hell's Kitchen or something, and I was in a used bookstore, and I happened to stumble across this book called History of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas, and it was translated by someone by the name of André Collard, a woman by the name of André Collard, C-O-L-L-A-R-D, I think that's how you pronounce her last name. It was translated from the original 15th century Spanish into English. It was originally written by Bartolomé de las Casas in 3 separate volumes. This was bound as a single volume. And it was a couple of dollars. It was used, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. I read the jacket. It was a contemporaneous account written by de las Casas as an eyewitness to the settling of the West Indies. And he was a young man under the gubernatorial administration of Christopher Columbus in the West Indies. He witnessed everything firsthand. And later in his life, he became a friar, a Dominican friar. He was assigned by the church and by the Crown of Spain to be protector of the Indians. And he was a vociferous protector of the Indians. And his account is just about the closest thing we have to an account of the settlement of the West Indies written by the tribal peoples themselves, because he was their mouthpiece, and he was a zealous mouthpiece for them. And also, it is considered the main primary historical source. There are some other primary historical sources, but this is the main one. So I thought, well, if I'm going to look into, I hadn't thought about looking into the statements in that countercultural magazine article, but I thought this might be helpful to sort of get some insight. So I bought the book, a couple of bucks, and I took it back to my apartment, and over the next couple of weeks, I read through it. And not only did this primary historical source completely debunk everything I had read in the article about Christopher Columbus, but it actually established the exact opposite of what the article said about Christopher Columbus. So the book made very clear Columbus was no racist. He was no rapist. He was no maimer. He was no murderer. He was no slave owner. He was no slave trader. He was no grifter. And he was definitely no genocide heir. In fact, it seemed to me, after just reading this book once through, that Columbus was really very much a civil rights activist, that he really did everything to protect the Indians from the Spanish nobles that followed in his wake to settle the West Indies, who wanted to enslave the Indians and mistreat the Indians and treat them as conquered people. And Columbus put his foot down and said, hey, as governor, I'm not letting you do that. These people are not conquered people. We're going to live side by side with them in peace. And we're going to set a model for the rest of the world, because other nations will come to settle. And we want our settlements to be a model for theirs. That was his position. And he interposed himself bodily between the swords of conquistadors and the Taínos. He rescued Taínos from capture by rival tribes, man-eating tribes. He did everything for the tribal peoples of the Americas. And so I read this, closed the book when I finished it, nodded my head, and thought, well, that's that. I guess that settles it. And I put the book away. I don't even know where it is. You know, that original copy that I bought, I don't even know where it is to this day. I lost track of it. Maybe I gave it to someone. I don't know. But I didn't think about it again for the rest of my years in New York. In the late 90s, I got a phone call from the district attorney's office in Philadelphia, the Lynn Abraham administration. Her deputy DA called me and said, would you like to come and work for us? Come back home to your hometown and be a DA here? And I said, sure. So I left New York. I became a prosecutor in Philadelphia and worked for decades in my profession as a prosecutor, now in my hometown. And again, didn't really think about Christopher Columbus at all, just never really came up. And then in 2018, Philadelphia City Council received, well, let's call it a petition that was sent to them by another attorney in Philadelphia who shall remain nameless, because I don't want to disparage or embarrass fellow members of the bar for their ignorance. But this fellow filed a petition with City Council requesting that Philadelphia City Council eliminate the municipal holiday of Christopher Columbus Day based on that old narrative that I had read in that countercultural periodical in New York City. Columbus is a racist, rapist, maimer, murderer, slave owner, slave trader, grifter, genocider. I call that the RRMMSSGG. That's the those are all the lies you hear about Columbus. And so, to their credit, City Council said, well, we should look into this. So they contacted the 1492 Society, which is that organization in Philadelphia that puts together the Christopher Columbus Day Parade every year. And the City Council asked the 1492 Society, do you have an historian on staff that could research these claims against Columbus? And in fact, the 1492 Society does have an historian on staff, a gentleman by the name of Mike DePilla. But that is not Mike's area of expertise, pre-Columbian history or Columbian history. His area of expertise is how the American founding fathers based the American government and architecture and infrastructure on the Roman Republic, and how the founding fathers admired the Roman Republic. That's his area. But he said, however, I have a friend who's a professional researcher, and perhaps he could be of assistance to you. So Mike contacted me, and I said, sure, yeah, I'd be happy to take this job on. And so I met with City Councilman Mark Squilla, and we discussed the issue. And Councilman Squilla purchased for me the primary historical sources. I said to Councilman Squilla, there's this book out there. It's called History of the Indies, and I'll need it, at least to start. And not only will I need it in English, I want, if you can get it, the original 15th century Spanish version written by Bartolomé de las Casas, so that I can read that and I can ensure that any of these claims are not based on mistranslations of the original sources. So he did that. He bought me the book and the original Spanish version, and I read them both. And I spent the next several years of my life very intensely studying not just that primary historical source, but the others, like The Life of the Admiral by Hernando Colón, and the epistolary accounts of Columbus's second voyage by Dr. Diego Chanca, and other such primary sources, Columbus's journals and logbooks and letters to Columbus from the Crown and so forth. And what I did was I wrote 2 reports to City Council. The first report was basically a book report of Volume 1 of History of the Indies, which basically covers the life of Columbus and his landfall and his voyages. And then I wrote a second report, which mainly covered the other 2 books of History of the Indies, which mostly take place after Columbus's death, and talk about Columbus's legacy and the rest of the settlement of the Indies. And I like to think that based on these reports to City Council, that's why Christopher Columbus Day remained on the books as a municipal holiday in Philadelphia for the next few years. Then we have 2020, the riots, the civil unrest, the Black Bloc wreaking havoc in American cities and in cities all across the world, push their agenda. And part of their agenda against Western culture was the raising of monuments. That's R-A-Z-I-N-G, not raising as to lift up, but raising as to tear down. The raising of monuments to Western culture and the elimination of Christopher Columbus Day wherever they could find it. And so the Black Bloc, the Marxists, the anti-Westerners, they resumed the work of the Ku Klux Klan from the 1920s, when the Ku Klux Klan also tried to tear down monuments and statues to Christopher Columbus, and also tried to eliminate the holiday of Christopher Columbus. It was as if the Klan had returned. And so everybody said, where's that guy? Get that guy that did all that Columbus research the first time around back in 2018. Where is he? Who is he? Get him. So I was thrust back into the spotlight again, and I went back on the lecture circuit. I resumed writing articles about the truth of Christopher Columbus, who he really was, and Radio Voice Italia gave me this opportunity to present to you Christopher Columbus University. And so that's where we are today, and that's who I am today. And I hope that what I'm going to present to you in the future episodes will open your eyes about who Christopher Columbus is, but more importantly, will open your eyes about who his detractors are and why they are detractors. If Christopher Columbus was such a wonderful person, then why the big lie? And that's what it is, ladies and gentlemen. It's the big lie. If you're not familiar with that term, the big lie was a propaganda technique that term was coined by Adolf Hitler to describe the lie that is so big, such a distortion of the truth, that, quote, the great masses of the people will fall for it because everybody tells little lies, so little lies you're always on guard for. But who would be so bold as to tell the big lie? And that is the catch. People believe the big lie. Hitler knew that. And the Black Bloc and the Marxists and the anti-Westerners, they know it too. And that's what the slander of Christopher Columbus is. It's the big lie. And you're going to see why in the episodes to come. So I hope that you find Christopher Columbus University to be as enlightening as I will try to make it. And that's today's class. For more news, articles, and resources about Christopher Columbus as the first civil rights activist of the Americas, an icon of Western culture, a paragon of Catholic virtue, and the greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries, visit preservecolumbus.us. That's Preserve Columbus, rendered as one word, .us, and post a little note of appreciation for our webmaster, Tom LaCosta. I'm il Professore, Robert Petrone. A presto.
The Jersey Shore has fun and sun and sea. And Radio Voice Italia.